everybody. It's Steve Falcon Napier. Welcome to the Circle of Brilliance. Today we're going to take a look at a couple of different topics depending on how our time unfolds. But this first one was sent over by Chris Gloss. No, it was either, no, I'm positive it was Chris. Send this over, and I don't know where he stumbled across it, but a couple of years ago, there was an article published called Every Leader Needs to Navigate These 7 Tensions. So let me chat this over to you guys, and so you have it as well. That's article number 1 or document number 1, and this document number 2. Okay, so this particular one is a very long, and I mean physically long because I saved it as a PDF. It must be several feet long if you tried to print it out. But basically what this author does is says that there's an old style way of leading people and there's a new style way of leading people. And so there's a traditional model and there's an emerging model. So, and it says here's the challenge. In the current environment, most executives need to be good at both styles in order to succeed, because obviously there's a transition going on. And so as I looked over these 7 different core tensions, I thought it could be interesting to see where these overlay on the change grid. That being said, I think that there is another tension that's being touched upon, although it's not being labeled separately. So let's read this paragraph beforehand, and you'll see which one I'm talking about. So in surveys and interviews with hundreds of leaders worldwide, we uncovered 7 core tensions between the traditional and emerging leadership approaches. I think they're differences, but we'll see why they want to use the word tension. Those tensions create significant stress for leaders as they are often unsure of what competencies, skills, and behaviors to exercise in a particular context. In this article, we describe the tensions, outline the dangers in ignoring them, and suggest coping strategies for balancing the 2 approaches. My reason for wanting to share this with you is because of this sentence in the middle. I think it's talking about a separate, independent, overarching sort of a tension that leaders are experiencing. So these tensions create significant stress for leaders as they're often unsure of what competencies to exercise in a particular context. That feels to me independent of these 7, and maybe all these 7 fall in that category, but this unsurety of what to do in general, I think is a standalone one. Not that that matters, but there you go. Okay. So let's take a look at these. And as we look at them, it might be interesting to say, well, where were these 2 traditional versus emerging behaviors lay on the change grid? And can we see any patterns as we look at these? So the expert versus the learner. So it's saying basically, traditionally, leaders have to know exactly what's going on with everything at all times. You know, they're supposed to be the end all be all, source of that. And today, more the emerging approach, leaders must accept that their specialized expertise is limited, in some cases obsolete, to be open to learning from others. So we get it. So if I look at the change grid, where are these people who are experts and locked into their expertise? Where's that traditional mindset around leadership live on the change grid?
Down grid.
Down grid. So we always go, is it more up or down? This feels more down. Is it more in or out?
Depends on whether or not they're exercising that expertise or not.
Yeah.
I would say maybe in.
Yeah, maybe in when they're in kind of a waiting sort of a mode. But if we're saying the way that they're leading is through their expertise, the display of that expertise or whatever, then I'd lean a little bit out. And so energetically, that would be a driven analytical is where the traditional leader would be, maybe just a balanced analytical. But because we're using that word leader and talking about leadership behaviors, I always want to make sure there's some driver ingredient in there. So anyway, that feels kind of like where they are if they're the ones that have already gathered the expertise, locked it in, etc. But now they're saying, no, you need to be a learner. You need to recognize that you may have no expertise whatsoever that is really timely, really up to date, state of the art kind of stuff. So fine, you got all your history, you got all that kind of stuff, but you need to get people who have that current expertise involved, and you need to learn from them. So we're in the change grid. Am I more likely to be in that learner mode? More
Upgrade,
upgrid, yep, more upgrade, more in-grid or more outgrid?
outgrid.
More outgrid. So maybe it's that amiable driver. Maybe it's a little bit of the analytical driver that's still trying to understand, trying to learn. So it feels like it's around here somewhere, a little bit up, maybe a little bit more out of where we said the traditional, what they call an expert would end up being. All right. So as I look at that, I kind of go, well, what am I trying to do? How would I help this person move from being a traditionalist to being more of a learner? Well, what would you guys do? Let's say that's your person. They're stuck in this leadership role, but they're not effective because they don't know what they need to know.
Give them some data that may help to change their mind on the current reality.
All right, so I'm going to come at them as that analytical driver, present facts to them that are going to help them see this gap between what they know and what is needed to be known in the present world. If I do that, by the way, something natural should happen to their perceived ability. The moment you become aware of the fact that there's stuff you need to know that you don't know, what happens to your perceived ability?
Goes down.
It goes down, it shrinks. With that's going to move you more up grid and a little bit more in grid. Um, now you have the intention to learn, etc. All right, so to me, I see the difference. And if anything, what I'm concerned about is true leadership does not happen in the analytical quadrant. We need it up here. I just need to move them from being a driven analytical up to an analytical driver, at a certain point. Okay, easy enough?
Mhm.
All right, let's take a look at them. The second tension. And for all these, if you bother reading the article, they lay it out in the first paragraph what the difference is, and then they give you some example from business. Tension number two, the constant versus the adapter. The traditional approach to leadership values decision-making, conviction, and consistency. Good leaders stick to their guns. By contrast, the emerging approach recognizes that in fast-changing environments, decisions often need to be reversed or adapted, and that changing course in response to new information is a strength, not a weakness. All right, so where on the change grid was that leader going to come across as being very constant, consistent? Stay on the path, don't deviate.
Hardline?
Heartline, yeah, how far out grid?
Yeah, maybe to the about there.
About okay here. All right, so
Yeah,
maybe we're from
I was looking for that the ellipse line there.
yeah, so because that would keep them in the engaged kind of part. So yeah, so there you're looking right around a driven, amiable driver, a balanced driver, or an amiable driven driver. All three of those would be along the heart line. Certainly, the further out grid the person would plot, the more convicted they become, the more rigid they become. Everything's very concrete. And I would not be at all surprised to find out that we can encounter people who are so locked in that they're out here in the danger zone. Yeah. Where the emerging
Yeah,
leader,
right where the amiable driver starts getting driven.
well, right, exactly. It starts to add to, oh, Chris is joining us. Excellent. So yeah, so that driver energy gets to be more and more and more dominant until that constant approach that the traditional leader is using is going to end up overriding whatever amiability they might have had. So Chris. I'm sending these documents through Chat GPT. Give it up, T, through the chat. Okay.
Okay, I farted.
Yeah, there you go. So, all right. So, looking at the adapter, for someone to be an adapter, they're recognizing again that in fast-changing environments, decisions need to be, we'll say, revisited, reversed, whatever. So, who is that on the change grid? Who do we need? Do we
A
need
driven expressive.
a driven expressive? Ooh, that's up here. That's pretty good. All right.
Oh,
Are you thinking driven expressive or expressive driver?
Expressive driver.
Expressive driver. And truly, anywhere along here is where problem-solving skills get pulled into play. Again, yesterday we were speaking a little bit about resilience, and I think that's what it's speaking to. It's saying the situation is changing. We got to not deny that these changes are occurring or that they don't matter, which is what this very far out grid person might be doing. Hanging on, killing it, executing. They're going to come along and say, wait, there is something that's needs to be figured out. And as it gets figured out, maybe we're pulling more people into play, a little bit more of that driven, amiable driver energy coming into play. And maybe ultimately new decisions have to be made or old decisions have to be revisited. Maybe there's some analytical energy that's going in, could be going in there as well. So I think we're basically saying that depending on the situation, the emerging leader has to be anywhere inside of this engagement ring, because they're actively engaged with the problem solving, the challenge, the whatever, or they're engaged with the people, or they're engaged with the revised solution. We don't want them to be too far out grid. Thoughts about that? All righty, let's look at number 3. Number 3, the tactician versus the visionary. The traditional approach to leadership calls for operational clarity and well-defined plans. The emerging approach suggests that leaders require a clear vision for where they want to go without necessarily needing a concrete roadmap for how to get there. All right, thoughts about that before we look on the grid? So if I'm a visionary, doesn't feel like I have much of a tactician going on at all. But again, because this is a transition, I may very well have to move into the tactical side of things. But ultimately, I think they're saying that a true leader has a team of individuals underneath them, and it is in that team that finding and developing those tacticians are going to become more important. But if we lose sight of the vision, does the tactical side continue to serve us as well as it might have done when it was aligned with the vision? All right, so let's see where that is on the change grid. Where are my tacticians? Where are my visionaries? And again, pretty much we're going to stay in this driver quadrant because they're saying this is all about leadership. So who are my tacticians?
Driven,
Analytical, expressive.
Oh, here we are. This is very interesting. Okay, an analytical expressive would be here.
Yeah, let's see. I'm looking.
Expressive analytical.
I would say maybe 9 challenge, 6 ability.
9, 6. Okay, yeah. So now you're on the border, pretty much between. Let's just say
analytical, expressive, and expressive.
Analytical. Yeah. Well, here you would be the analytical, amiable driver. That's this spot.
Yeah.
This is the expressive, driven, analytical. Okay, hopefully you guys are wrapping your head around tertiaries to know that we're leading.
I've got that little graph in front of me, the slide with all the different colors.
Yeah, and so you can really get the blend of what's going on here. This person is a tactician. They are figuring out what the systems are, whether they're pulling in more of an analytical energy or maybe even an amiable energy, because they got to get people to take action on whatever those tactical plans are. Otherwise, it's just a plan. So there's got to be an implementation part going on as well. Bottom line, though, that feels a bit downgrid compared to the visionary. So where do you think a visionary comes from? What energy does a visionary, just by that label, need to have?
Expressive.
Expressive, exactly right. They got to be able to see something that isn't there and feel something worth feeling about it. So I'm thinking that visionary is going to be the expressive driver kind of energy. And by the way, you guys can say, yeah, well, an expressive, amiable driver, maybe that's it. So we're talking about a general vicinity. The visionary, though, to me feels more of that upgrid kind of a thing. And as they start to formulate that vision, make that vision a little bit clearer, yeah, they're moving downgrid because they're adding more structure to it. So, but it's all going to be here, I think, on the change grid. Very much engaged, but very much flexible, forward thinking, etc. So again, the pattern that we seem to be looking at is that traditional leadership is much further down grid and out grid than may be serving leadership well. We need today's leaders in the emerging leadership to be willing to be moved more in grid and more up grid, and certainly more up grid than in grid. I just don't want them in the danger zone. And I'm happy enough. Thoughts about this? Comments? So far, so good. All right.
Yep.
Yep, good. Let's look at number 4. The teller versus the listener. Okay, pretty straightforward. Who's going to be very directive and who's going to be listening carefully to others before deciding? This one should have
Expressive analytical.
an expressive analytical.
Well, the expressive is the teller and the analytical is the listener.
Yes, I would also say that the teller is more of a driver and the listener is more of an amiable.
Mhm.
So
Right.
put these two things together and we have our listeners are right here and our tellers tend to be more up here. Teller is certainly more out grid than in grid, and I think it's more up grid. No, wait, I got to think that through just a second.
AT, could it be around 9-9? Because
Well,
it's
yeah.
each,
Because
really.
I'm thinking analytical drivers are also tellers, but I think that the driven driver is kind of like in your face telling you what needs to be done or just delivering it as a done deal. Don't ask questions, just follow through. You're all the followers, do as you're told kind of thing. That's that energy where I think at least the analytical driver is coming at it saying like, here's what we figured out. Here's our plan. We've all had our input on it. This is what we've come up with. There's a little bit more diplomacy, obviously, because it's a little bit further in grid. So there is just an overall amiable energy that wasn't there for too far out grid. Be an amiable driven driver and we'll have a very, very successful outing. But if I want someone to instead be, by their words, instead of being a teller, I need to be a listener. Who is a good listener? The amiable energy is a very good listener about people and how people are impacted. An analytical is also open to discussions, but more on the task side of things. They're trying to analyze and understand something. So yeah, I still am going to go back. Yeah, these are my listeners. These are my tellers. These are my tellers. And the teller part of an expressive driver, this is the ultimate preacher. So this is my visionary. Oh, I just use that word. This is my missionary. This is my cheerleader. This is my enthusiasm. There's a lot of telling that's going on there as well. But very different style, obviously, the driven driver. Okay, so again, what do we need to do to help people move from being a traditional leader to this emerging leader? I think we're going to see the pattern will continue. We need to help them move in grid and a bit up grid at times. In this particular case, in grid would do the job, maybe in grid and down grid, specifically if the listening needs to happen around something of a more technical nature. So I do like what Chris put forth. Maybe it really is just 9-9 is where we want people to be, and we want them to not be at 10-10. So still a movement in grid. Yeah. All right. Tension number 5, the power holder versus the power sharer. Okay. Leaders must lead from the top, make decisions, take actions independently. The emerging approach values empowering others to achieve goals. Okay, this one's straightforward. Where's Bossy McBoss Boss?
Outgrid,
There's
driver.
our outgrid. And where's the person who wants to involve others more?
Amiable.
Amiable. So I'm thinking an amiable, wait, scratch that. A driven, amiable driver is someone who's going to be more participative. If I get too far in grid, an amiable driver, that might be a little bit too gentle. So because leadership is involved, maybe I want him to be here. But right now, if I'm Bossy McBoss Boss, where am I? I'm much further out grid. So if I'm way out here, even in a danger zone, any movement in grid will be an improvement. But that feels like pretty much a direct in grid maneuver sort of a behavior. So again, stop wielding your power and instead share that power, or we'll show you how fast you can become powerless. Yeah, okay. And then number 6, the intuitionist, all right, versus the analyst. Now we're looking a little bit different of a thing. So the traditional approach suggests that leaders build up a gut, an expert gut to make intuitive decisions. All right. By contrast, the emerging approach says that leaders should base decisions largely on data. Okay, where's my gut live?
Expressive driver.
Yeah,
Driven expressive.
driver, driven expressive. Okay, this is a driven expressive driver. Okay, I'm in the right vicinity. This is all feeling good. Let's see if we can pinpoint it a little bit more. So again, looking back at it, the intuitionist versus the analyst. Well, I'll tell you where I'm having my little puzzle, or my little question mark come up. There is a model of human behavior that talks about head, heart, soul, and gut. I think that came out of looking at the elements. So water, air, fire, water, air, fire, earth, and ether, I think was the one in the middle, this more spiritual one. So usually we've said the people who operate out of heart are going to be more of the amiable energy. Head is going to be more of the analytical energy, which left us head, heart, soul, and gut. Which ones are going to be more operating from their soul versus through their gut? And I think the answer was, we said that gut definitely fell in the outgrid quadrant. Head, are those the 4? Head, heart, soul, and gut? Yeah. So the soul was going to be more upgrid. And I think in our discussion, we said maybe soul is really in the middle and we need a different word for what people are operating out of if you're in that upgrade kind of thing. But nevertheless, I do think their map, head, heart, soul, gut overlaid with gut being outgrid. So what we're implying there is that someone who is outgrid, the further outgrid they go, the more, I'm going to say, instinctual or gut driven they're going to say they are. But I think there's a lot more going on. I think it's a lot more confidence leads to courage, leads to bravery, that they have to make a decision. They have to be decisive if they're this far out grid. So if they want to attribute their decision to it's what their gut is telling them to do, if for no other reason they haven't taken the time or the effort to process where this conviction is really coming from, it might be coming from analytical things from the past. It might be coming from, journeys taken before. So yeah. Yeah. So I think they're going to say pretty much that intuitionist is going to be more outgrid and upgrid, and that the facts need to be more downgrid or ingrid, some combination. Does that feel right to you guys, or are you thinking,
No, that feels right.
And again, we can break it down. We can say, the analytical energy is very fact oriented, obviously, about whatever the task at hand happens to be. And amiable energy is also quite fact oriented, but more fact oriented about people. And so that's why we say the amiable driver could make a very effective operations officer, where we want the analytical energy to be more like a financial officer or a technology officer, an information officer, whatever falls into. Where the visionaries, what's their word? They're intuitionists. I know the people that are upgrade are feeling things very strongly, and they may very well label that feeling as coming from their intuition. I still think it could be coming from the mothership, but so be it. Okay, so are we cool with this one? Again, to fix it, we might very well need to move that person. Wow, they're saying that the problem is intuition and we want people to become more data-driven. Anybody bristling against that? Can't they just become balanced? And I guess I'm saying that because I think all of us have worked with large corporations long enough to know that as more and more large organizations became controlled more and more by finance instead of by sales and marketing, the company's bottom line might have improved, but it did so at the cost of its soul. Yeah, anybody experience that, or am I just the one that attracts these profoundly dysfunctional corporations? They're leaving me hanging. Thanks, guys.
Take your word for it.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's look at the seventh tension. And then Chris, you threw this our way, so I'd be curious to know if this answered whatever questions you had or gave you any kind of insight you were looking for. The perfectionist versus the accelerator. They would be implying that the accelerator is an emerging thing. Okay, the emerging approach calls for leaders to acknowledge that doing something quickly and failing fast is often more important than doing it perfectly. Okay, I can agree with that. The traditional approach asserts that leaders should take the time to deliver a perfectly finished product. Oh my. Well, I know that my biggest problem has always been perfectionistic tendencies. Yeah, I mean, big problem for me. But being an accelerator just feels, I don't know. All right, anyway, where does the perfectionist live? More upgrid or downgrid?
Downgrid.
Downgrid. And this accelerator, more upgrade or downgrid?
Grid.
More
Upgrade.
upgrade. I also think that an accelerator is going to be more in-grid or out-grid. Who wants to
Outgrid.
accelerate things?
Oh, great.
Out-grid, and the in-grid person is happy to slow things down. So they might want perfect relationships with people, and the analytical energy is looking for perfection over the task at hand, but they're still trying to do the right things. That shouldn't be surprising. I imagine that one of the big driving forces, even in the world of HR, is we need to find the right person for the right job, and we need to take whatever time it takes to do that. Otherwise, we're going to have to do it again later. And so I can kind of hear that perfectionistic preference on the in-grid side of things, and certainly on the down-grid side of things. Yeah. Okay. So we look at this, and I guess the same thing is going to hold true, though they're saying that we want to leave perfection and move into that accelerator. Was it accelerator? Yeah, that accelerator energy. And that again is going to involve moving up grid, not in grid. Not in grid, more upgrade, build a fire underneath your feet. All right, so anyway, I do think that this is an interesting thing to look at. I do think that what it really is just a breakdown of the different behavioral options that leaders have available to them. And then we might be looking at a little bit more about, are they in locked in patterns with these things? Are they flexible about it? In the middle, yeah. What's going on in that dynamic. So this feels like a very coachable kind of a discussion you could be having with people. Yeah. All right. Brian's joining us, and someone's calling in. So Chris, can you unmute? Did this give you what you were looking for?
Absolutely. Very helpful and insightful. And then just thinking about, as I continue to do leadership training, how just the landscape is changing so much and changing rapidly, where there's so much conversation that's leaning more towards the psychological safety.
Yeah.
That there's always a balance. Like I was sharing with this one organization I was talking to in the military, the motto for my organization was mission first, people always.
Okay.
So there's a balance there that I think really helps things turn out well, where everyone's psychological safety, because I think it's people are abandoning, I don't know if that's right, but abandoning the leader's psychological safety, right?
Yeah.
Where it's just all for others, but you got to remember that leader's a person too. So what's the psychological safety and the balance for them as they see first, people always?
Well, I think we've actually touched upon that. You'll have to remind me where this discussion fit in, but we were talking about, I think it was power versus strength, something like that. It was a book that was written long ago. It had something to do with that whole kinesiology sort of a thing, but they were applying it to leadership and management. Anyway, I think it was called Power versus Strength. And one of the things that it said is that as things are evolving, let me just throw in a side thing as we're moving up the spiral dynamic, because things are evolving. We have to ask ourselves, is the power that we're using positional power or personal power? So when you think about the executives that you're working with, or traditional executives, they wielded their power as a weapon against others. They were the top dog. They could hire you, they could fire you, promote you, demote you. There was this idea that the power that they had was only in their ability to um, provide rewards and consequences, etc. Where then they said what you really need is personal power. Personal power was about the ability to connect with people and understand them and touch them at a heart level. More of the things we talk about when we get into pride-based leadership. And so there was this movement from positional power to personal power. And I also remember we said that one of the things we know for certain is that people with great personal power may also have bestowed upon them great positional power, but they don't use it because they don't need it. So does that resonate with you guys? Is that a reminder from something else we've talked about?
Yeah, no, that's a clear statement.
Yeah, yeah. And so I think that resonates with what was that Tim or Chris who just chimed in? Chris was just saying, I don't know if the phone number is Tim. Um, I don't know, area code 704. No, that's
But
it.
you know what, how many define leadership? That's a perfect explanation where they say leadership is influence.
Leadership is influence. Okay. Yeah.
There's plenty to unpack there, but I guess it's the mindset of influential leadership and positional leadership. I think it's termed like it's the lowest form
Yeah. Well,
of
really, I
leadership.
mean, because positional power is about well, it's the carrot versus the stick kind of thing, which predates all of us. So that positional power is all about using the stick, and positional power is all about using the carrot. And so about understanding motivations, and yeah, it's all an influencing art, because the moment we use the word leadership, we know that the verb inside of it is to lead, and to lead means you're not staying where you're at, you're going someplace, so something has to change. And so I think this all is resonating very, very well, whether we're talking about influencing skills. Long ago, by the way, I didn't label MasterStream as a sales training program. I initially labeled it as an influencing skills program, but for some reason that confused sales managers. And so I had to refer to it as a sales training program, but you could use these skills anytime you need to influence anybody to do anything. So I thought, okay, fine. You do have to meet your client where they are. So if that required changing the title of a program, so be it. Okay. All right.
You know what?
Yes,
I would love to hear your thoughts on. I was having a conversation about psychometric tools, personality type driven tools
yeah.
versus task. So
Yeah.
as a leader, you got to find that balance there. But what are your thoughts on leading from task perspective versus personality perspective?
Okay. So let's go back to our 5 key skills of true leadership and see how many of what we're talking about there fall into these 5, or are we really using the word leader when we're talking about managing? So let's talk about it. So leader, number 1, a leader has the ability, to articulate a compelling vision.
Right.
A compelling vision. If I was just going to be telling you what to do, I don't need to tell you what the vision is. I just need to tell you what to do and you'll be doing it. So create a compelling vision. The second thing I need to be able to do is to awaken desire in the hearts of others. The third thing is I need to be able to create and maintain an environment of pride. So, people really feel like they've got the best thing going on. The fourth thing I need to keep them focused on a singular destination. And then number 5, I need to be able to identify and develop other true leaders. So about as task oriented as I get there is, yeah, I'm doing the task of articulating the compelling vision. And I guess I'm doing the task of awakening their vision, but that doesn't feel like I'm focusing on tasks that they have to do. When I get to keeping them focused on a single destination, or that vision thing, where are we actually going, I don't think I'm getting into the nuts and bolts of how to do that in my role as a true leader. So what's that telling us about if someone is trying to use, just staying on the task versus using the psychology of personality typing, whatever other psychometric tool they might be using? All right, I'm done babbling. What you think?
It's the driver versus the amiable.
It's the driver versus the amiable. How about if I said it's the driven driver versus the amiable driver?
Yes.
Yeah, because they're still in that outgrid side, part of the world. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
isn't that the a challenge, I should say, not the challenge, but a challenge of leadership in general? Oftentimes it's focused on what a leader does as opposed to, or I guess exclusively, without the who the leader is, right? So that embodiment of those things, because that's where I think the true influence is going to come from. In the book, Aspire, I forget the author's name, but when he was looking at the root of words, I'm fascinated with that from Latin. But he said the root of leadership actually comes from being a pathfinder.
Yeah. Okay. I'll grant that.
Yeah. So again, imagine a leader, the difference between a leader who's just, that's focused on the what, as opposed to this pathfinder. I think of those social influencers like, the Nelson Mandelas and Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa.
Yeah.
They embodied something that people wanted to draw themselves closer to them. And that leadership's uniquely different, I think, than what often comes out of just management conceptions.
Yeah, let me throw in there this idea about the who authored the vision. So we've always said that when it comes to pride-based leadership, the leader needs to have the ability to articulate a compelling vision. They didn't necessarily have to originate it. They could be assigned the vision, because some of the things that you're using as examples, or the one that came to my head was that you always send out scouts. So when you're exploring new territory, yeah, I need to be the leader of all the people, the leader of all the resources, the actual movement. But I do believe I've probably employed the skills of really good trackers and trail finders and all those kinds of explorer types who can tell us in advance that we need to take the road to the right, not the road to the left, unless we want to find ourselves needing to climb over the mountain instead of walk through the valley. So I don't know where that fits in, but I would say it's the same thing in an organization about having a department for research and development. Now, that department is, to me, the ones that are really exploring what's possible, and then they're going to bring information back to the powers that be and say, hey, this is what's ready to go, this is where it fits in, etc. And now that gets assigned to a leader who's going to say, this is the vision, this is what this is where we're going, this is what's going on. But we're still getting back to this idea about, does the leader concern themselves with tasks, specific tasks? And if they do, is that really an act of leadership? So let me throw it back to Chris for a second. Chris, how's this resonating with what you were sharing?
It resonates well. It's more of a management or manager's function. And I think in corporate America, I think the word leadership is used interchangeably, but shouldn't be used interchangeably, because people are normally on the front lines. That's more of a title than a function or a position.
Yeah, no, we've said this for a long time, that the biggest problem with corporations, and I don't mind, I'll blame the world of academia. They seem to have commingled the leadership role and the management role, and in that commingling, they have lost the truth that there's a totally different skill set involved. And if I look at the curriculum for any sort of leadership curriculum in a a university sort of setting, you go ahead, you read down that list and tell me how often you see articulating a compelling vision, awakening desire in the hearts of other people, creating and maintaining an environment of pride, keeping people focused on a single destination, and
Nope.
identifying and developing other true leaders. That's not in the curriculum.
It's nowhere to be seen. I remember when I was doing an executive MBA, all of those 5 that you just mentioned are questions that I asked, so that was nowhere to be found.
Yep. Nope.
And even now, just today, I think I just read an article of MBA and nowhere to go. So they're talking about this idea that they're graduating all these MBAs who have the so-called leadership capacities and capabilities, but they get into these positions and their management skills are just not, in terms of what a leader
That's right.
articulates, is
right.
not there.
That's right. That's right. And even in pride-based leadership, we say, you know, where this all came from was observing the most successful leaders historically. What did they do that was unique to this role of being the leader? And that's what those 5 things really are. I think that a lot of people want the leadership title, even though the role is actually a management role. But for some reason, people think that managers on the hierarchy of things are lower than leaders. And the truth is, it's the managers that are ultimately getting the work done more so than it is the leader. So I'm going back to Chris's, I think, original position. I think leaders are dealing far more with the psychology of the people that they are considering or hoping to develop as their followers, where managers are trying to get workers to do whatever it is that needs to be done. So are all workers followers? Not
No.
necessarily, but are all followers workers?
Yes.
And so not all leaders are managers. And certainly the vast majority, no, I think that's really true. I don't really know that a leader has to lead anybody. They got this immediate handful of people around them. But I would be saying I want those working more as an effective collective rather than as a hierarchical kind of an arrangement.
Right.
You're in your C-suite, your authority can get in your way. So, the C-suite is supposed to be a safe environment where you guys are different parts of the same brain. But yeah, who knows? We'd have to go personally. Anyway, long answer, short question. Chris, I do believe leaders are focused more on the personality side of things. managing the energies. Okay. Any other questions, comments about this subject before we look at the other one?